Hey guys, a while ago I was reminded that Heartbound was in my Steam wishlist because the creator, PirateSoftware, had been in some hot water for his views on the Stop Killing Games initiative and the fallout that has come of that. Before all of this, I didn't even know that the game and the content creator were related, but after realizing it, I figured I might as well finally give it a look. After looking at the store page for the game again, I noticed that all the recent reviews are negative, but I want to separate that from the creator itself and give the game a fighting chance. Overall, I'd rather enjoy the game instead of feeling like I wasted 10 bucks, so we're going to really give it our all on this one. So this review is going to mostly ignore any of the recent actions or statements of Pirate Software and only really mention him when it comes to his history developing the game. And speaking of history, this game has been in the works for a while, so let's jump in and talk about that real quick. From what I can tell, we're coming up on a decade of Pirate Software working on Heartbound in some way or another. The project is dated back to October 7th, 2015, being made as a proof of concept so Pirate could learn how to use GameMaker Studio, which the eventual release would also be made in. Without going over each version of the game, I'm just going to hit some of the highlights real quick, just to give you an idea of sort of the process of Heartbound. Pirate worked on a game for a little over a year before launching a Kickstarter in February of 2017, making almost 4 times its $5,000 goal. Beyond this being a huge success, it's also worth mentioning that a demo was also released that was around 30 minutes long, and that the entire story was planned out with all core systems of the game working as well at this point, according to Pirate Software. All in all, a pretty good start for an indie RPG. And then, a little less than 2 years later, in late 2018, Heartbound would come to early access on Steam. From there, it would release monthly content updates until it was eventually released, wrapping up the story that was charted out a couple years earlier and extending that 30-minute demo time by quite a bit. Unfortunately, it hasn't reached that finish line. That last part was a lie. Heartbound is not done, only having covered 3 of the 5 chapters that the game is divided into. The story is still unfolding, and for that near decade of work, the game took me roughly 2.5 hours to play through. Not much added time to that 30-minute demo that it started out with. Other indie games have come and gone in the time that Heartbound has been in development. The most obvious comparison to me is Undertale, which was made by one person in a little less than 3 years and can easily take 15 hours to fully experience and has multiple routes to go through. So since Heartbound has had over 3 times the amount of time to cook, let's talk about the experience and story you can expect so far from someone that finished it recently. Before we even talk about the story for Heartbound, I want to touch on what I think can make a story work in a video game or really in any work of fiction. Usually you want it to go down some sort of path that hooks you to the end. This can be done in a ton of ways. You can make the character interactions stand out by building interesting relationships. You can make someone relate to the main character or cast. You can make someone evolve over the course of a narrative while in an interesting journey or while going through some sort of event or personal struggle. There's tons of other ways to make a story work. Look, I'm not an English teacher, but there are some starting points and they all resolve around one thing. There's something interesting that you are experiencing, and as you play a game, you should be engaging and looking forward to that interesting story continuing before coming to a satisfying conclusion. When it comes to Heartbound, I think it tries and fails at all the examples I listed a minute ago. Starting out, you wake up as Lore, a young boy living in a house in the woods with his parents. You go over to your dog and talk to it while exploring your house. As you pass your parents' room, your father tells you to take out the trash, and the text changes from fairly normal to a little more rude. An interesting story choice, all things considered. My only issue is that this will happen throughout the rest of the current game, and if you look away or even blink sometimes for a second, you will miss parts of the dialogue. It's not a big deal, but I felt it was worth mentioning. Now, back to the story. You take the garbage out for your father. I unironically thought this was great because it gives you a reason to explore the rest of the area. You head to the kitchen, grab the garbage, and bring it out, seeing all of the starting house and surrounding yard. While out in the yard, you notice an axe that you can collect before heading back inside. After going back in, you feed your dog before heading back to bed. After going to bed, you wake up once again and everything is destroyed in this entire house. Your room is a mess with big slashes everywhere and your dog is missing. Somehow this doesn't seem to wake up your father or you. Your dad doesn't seem to care. You seem to have slept soundly through this whole thing until it ended. So you have to brave the woods alone to find your dog. As you leave your house, you find his collar, letting you know you're on the right track. I also think this is great. This is leading me towards knowing I'm doing the right thing. It's good so far. Soon after, you're introduced to a pretty simple puzzle with some logs blocking your way to the final introductory fight. In this fight, at the end of the beginning section of the game, you face off against what I can only really describe as a dark blob or monster that I later learned from the wiki is called a Barghest. You fight it through a couple different minigames that I'll touch on later in the video. Towards the end of the fight, you are saved by an old man named Binder and transported to his house. He tells you what I can only describe as a vague setup for the story ahead before telling you to go through a portal in order to find an artifact that will somehow help you find and save your dog Baron. After entering this portal, you are transported to a world that seems suspended in space. Get used to that because a big chunk of the game will look very similar. You go through some more puzzles before finding the artifact that Binder mentioned. It's at this point that some dark entity seems to take over your body or your mind, and you are sent to a dark tunnel, kind of like what you would go to in the mountains in Pokemon is the best way I can describe it. You make your way to the end of the tunnel and see the monster that you fought before, and you do that fight again exactly as you did before. At the end of the fight, you find out that it was or is your dog, some version or corrupted form of it at least, and that's the setup for the game. The dog isn't dead, even though it looked very dead just a second ago, and you go to different worlds to try and find it while learning more about the worlds and the artifact and Binder and how all those things sort of connect back to you, the main character lore. A lot happens really quickly in this intro, but I think it's the best overall experience in the game. Most major characters are introduced for the most part, and it does a great job of getting you used to the mechanics in terms of action and puzzle solving. If this is all I had experienced, I probably would have said that it looks like an interesting RPG, a cool demo, if a little vague, and in need of fleshing out. It's what comes after that I have a problem with. So, after finishing this intro area, you are given the choice to go to 3 other worlds in any order you like. However, one only shows the opening cutscene, so there are really only 2 other areas to explore right now. The first one is an office building that is in a state of ruin and also seems to be set in space or just some strange dimension with a black background. Here you are introduced to new characters and have to try out different jobs in the office that take the form of fetch quests or small, simple minigames. This is also you can be promoted so you can hopefully find your dog in this office space, I guess. It feels a little disjointed in my opinion, but who's to say this won't make sense in an eventual final release? At the end of the section, you see your dad and you learn that he works here as well. You also meet your mom for the first time, and it seems that you guys don't have the best relationship, leading you into a boss fight similar to the one in the first world. Except that is all a lie. You talk it out with your mom, and there is no fight to be heard of. Arguably a healthier but way less fun way to deal with this encounter. And from there, this world is finished. To my eyes, it seems only loosely related to finding your dog, the ultimate goal, but you do get to learn a bit more about Lore and his parents, so it at least makes a bit of sense in the grand scheme of things, I suppose. And I'm glad we're fleshing out the lore of the main character in any way. I don't know, if I can say anything positive about this area, I think the artwork here is the one I like the most. From here, we move on to the final playable area in Heartbound, and this one is by far my least favorite, unfortunately. In this world, we find ourselves in a forest, and we are surrounded by a bunch of anthropomorphic animals who, after being initially threatened by our mere presence, help us fix a pocket watch that we have been gifted. It's not really clear what this watch will do for us, but this is the current goal when it comes to finding our dog, I guess. While in this world, we are shepherded from one new character to another. As we get this watch fixed, we have to answer very basic good or bad questions posed by each character. The only problem is that it's very obvious that the evil entity or whatever it was from the early puzzle rooms that sort of possessed us for a moment wants us to answer negatively, as text boxes in his style will show up in this point. It felt pretty poorly done and telegraphed to the point that I wanted to see what would happen if I answered negatively. So I did, like once or twice. Because of this, towards the middle of this section of the game, there's a deer and a mountain lion living together who clearly like each other, and I basically was asked if I thought they should confess their feelings for each other. I figured that I don't really know either of these characters yet, so I would just stay out of it. Well, lo and behold, that is apparently an evil thing to do. I don't know, I just felt like it wasn't really my business, but I guess that makes me the worst person in the world. After I made that dark decision, you get to see a cutscene play out where they decide to not fully confess, but there's a lot of subtext there and they decide to stay friends. As far as I can tell, this caused the deer to evaporate and cease to exist. A bit of an overreaction if you ask me, and also kind of an insane effect of one dialogue choice, but what do I know? Beyond that, it doesn't really seem like my decision had any effect on me or my character personally. I think it was just supposed to affect my moral sensibilities that I caused this deer to die. Yeah, I think it was just to make me feel bad about my actions, but so many characters are introduced all the time that you never really get attached to any of them or get a sense of who is important to the overall story, what weight you should be giving everyone. So as we continue in this world, we eventually come to an old turtle couple that bicker quite a bit and are about to go for a walk somewhere that we also need to get to. You walk with them both for a while, and eventually their argument gets so bad that they decide to take diverging paths for a while. You have to choose who to go with. I chose to go with the messier, more outwardly grumpy male turtle, and we talked about his relationship for a while. I did enjoy this part of the game, not really much because of the content, but just because that there was a clear choice that I was given. I don't know if it changed anything, but it was a choice nonetheless that had a different outcome, which I was happy about. And that's basically the end of this area. There was also these cosmic mask siblings that reminded me of the masks from Crash Bandicoot. but we only ever talked to them in a void, and they were as vague as Binder from the beginning, so I don't really pay much attention to them. I'm sure that they'll have much more credence and weight to the story later, hopefully. And that's the end of everything that's currently playable. If it feels a little disjointed and rushed, that's because I think it is. Maybe in a decade when the game is finished, it will all come together, but as of right now, it felt myself being mostly bored with the story as it kept bombarding me with dialogue from characters that I was just introduced to before sending me off to meet new people to again be introduced to. It felt like half this game was being introduced to characters, which was really disappointing. Never really let you sit with any of its many storylines or get to know its characters, so after a while it becomes pretty much impossible to take any of them seriously, which is a problem. Heartbound seems more interested in shoving as many story ideas at you as possible, instead of pulling any of them off in a satisfying way. It really is a shame because a lot of the settings could be really cool, a lot of them look awesome, and a lot of the characters seem interesting at first glance to me. I wanted to like these story ideas more than I did, but you're moved through everything at such a pace that I just didn't have the time to get attached to anything about it. But story aside, a good game is one that also has satisfying mechanics and generally feels good to play, or at least interesting to play. This could be anything from the combat to the puzzles, or even the movement and sense of progression that you feel as you play the game. That can do a lot to make you forget about problems with the story of a game. And Heartbound does promise varied combat and puzzles. That's another promise that unfortunately I think it breaks for the time being. Mostly because there's very little here to actually interact with. The only two fights that you experience in this game are the two repeated fights in the first intro section, and the fight with your mother, if you can call it that, since it ends up not really being much at all. This is a pretty big problem for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because they are the exact same, but also because they come so early on, right after another, that you kind of expect that frequency to keep up for the rest of the game. And even if you aren't expecting the pace of fights to carry on, you would surely expect more fights if you know anything about Heartbound and its history. It was a key point of the Kickstarter, for crying out loud. And look, I get it, the game isn't finished, so there's still time to add more combat. Pirate Software has only been a decade to work on it, to be fair. But there were plenty of places where combat could have been added. Give me a fight in the office space level between that guy that kept asking me for favors, or a fight in the woods with some sort of animal, any sort of conflict. I don't know, something to break up the monotony of talking to new characters every 10 minutes that you don't care about. Pirate Software has gone on record saying he didn't want to put in random encounters, and that can work, but since there aren't any, and the story isn't really interesting so far, at least to me, you really notice that there isn't much of anything in the way of interactive gameplay. This, to me, is worse than a walking simulator or games like that get a bad rap, because people play those games for the story, and that sort of carries it. But when the story isn't carrying this game, and the game mechanics and the gameplay also isn't carrying it, there isn't really much to enjoy for me personally. I wasn't expecting to love this game, but I genuinely wanted to like it more than I did, unfortunately. I like RPGs, but a lot of these decisions left me scratching my head. It seems like he stripped most of everything away, and that just leaves nothing behind. One thing that didn't make me scratch my head were the puzzles, though. It honestly is the same issue as the combat. It's too easy, they're only in the beginning, and then it's very obviously missing from there on out. It's one of the reasons I spent so much time talking about the story, because for all of its faults, there seems to be what Pirate Software wants us to focus on. And he has said that the writing is the biggest holdup for finishing the game, so I would expect that much more content to be added to the early game. And I would also expect the story to be a lot more interesting, since he's just had so much more time to work on it. This does make me wonder why they include the combat and puzzles in the beginning at all, also. It only makes their absence more glaring as we move throughout the game. If you want this game to be pure story and dialogue, at least stick to that idea. It makes me feel like it was only added at all because it was something that was promised in the Kickstarter all the way a decade ago. Ironically, I can only see adding these elements at all would cause backers to be disappointed that there isn't more and make regular customers confused why these fights and puzzles are only in the beginning of the game. It feels disjointed and lacking, both at the same time. The perfect lose-lose situation. And yeah, there's pretty much everything I have to say about Heartbound. There are ARG elements to this game also, but I didn't interact with them, and I don't think the average player would either unless they are a super fan of this game. And given the fact that it's not done, I'm going to guess that part of the player base is small. If you really care about that stuff, you probably don't need this review anyway, so where does Heartbound go from here? Even though I had mostly negative things to say about this game, I hope that it makes up for lost time and comes out on the other end a finished product that people can enjoy from start to finish, if not for the sake of Pirate Software, then for the sake of his Kickstarter backers. One thing that I didn't mention that much was the fact that the artwork in this game is genuinely beautiful and the music fits the theme of the individual worlds pretty well, I just want to highlight those positive features of this game. But that can't make up for a bad game on its own, and it mostly just makes me sad. It seems wasted on a game that doesn't know what it wants to be and is afraid to commit to being anything. So yeah, I didn't think this would be amazing, but I thought it would find more things that I liked about it. What about you guys? If you've played Heartbound before, am I way off base? Am I missing something that makes this obviously great? I would love to have a conversation down in the comments. As for everyone else, I hope this was helpful, and I have more stuff in the pipeline, so stay tuned and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.